close approach. Journey through darkness. We are joined with industry. Legacy is saved. Dodge radiation. Humans reach for God of War. Take the close approach. Falling in thin air. Breathless anticipation. Regolith awaits. Rainbow galaxies compete with the stars above me. Mars is now my home.
Welcome to Speculative Sandbox, your audio playground for creative storytellers. My name is Vicky Lawn, and each episode, I and a guest will unpack a fiction trope with an eye for character development and narrative structures. Make sure to look for Speculative Sandbox on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter, where you can join the conversation. Leave comments or questions, or let us know what other tropes we should cover. When the real world just doesn't cut it, let's get lost in a fictional one.
This episode is brought to you by Stars. Lisa Tadeo's best-selling book is about to become your favorite new show. Based on a true story, the new Stars original series 3 Women stars Shailene Woodley as Gia, a grieving and struggling writer who embarks on a cross-country road trip where she meets 3 women determined to radically change their lives. This one is not to be missed. Watch the season premiere of 3 Women now, only on Stars and the Stars app.
Wendy Van Camp, thank you so much for joining me on Speculative Sandbox today. This is going to be a very different kind of episode because I'm going to learn about your very special and unique form of poetry. So can you introduce yourselves and tell me and the listeners what you do?
Okay, thank you, Vicky, and it's a pleasure to be here on your program. My name is Wendy Van Camp. I am the Poet Laureate for the city of Anaheim, California. And I am what is known as a speculative poet. This means that I write poetry in many forms, although I have a specialty, which I'll go into. But my poetry is of science fiction or fantasy or astropoetry theme. So I take a lot of my poetry inspiration from science journals, and sometimes I take my ideas from common science fiction tropes that any writer, a novelist or short story writer would use, but I turn them into poems. Now, I actually specialize in a poetry form called Scifaiku, which is science fiction themed haiku, although I also write astropoetry, which is poetry about space and stars in haiku form too. And I'll be reading a few examples of that for you later. But yeah, I've been a poet for, maybe 15 years now. I kind of stumbled on it by accident. Previously, in another life, so to speak, I was a novelist and I wrote science fiction. It's what I grew up reading almost exclusively. And when I became a novelist almost 20 years ago, that is what I wrote because, that's what I knew. But one day I was at a con and stumbled in on a poetry workshop. I didn't even know it was. I just saw on a sign next to a seat I happened to be sitting on, and it said Scifaiku Workshop. And I went, Scifaiku? What the heck is that? And I went, there's air conditioning inside. It's really hot out in the courtyard. I'm going to just go in and get a glass of water and, cool down a little bit, and we'll see. So I go into the room, and there's like 6 or 7 people. I thought, oh, good, other people are here for the class. So I just took a seat. And, it was all very casual. Well, one of the people from the group went up to the front of the room, and she says, good day, I will be your instructor today. And she looks right at me, and she says, you will be my only student. And I kind of went, what? I go, who are these other people? And she goes, oh, these are just friends that have come to support me. They're all editors of national level poetry magazines. I hope you don't mind. And I kind of sank in my chair and went, oh my God.
Wow.
But I kind of felt sorry for her because obviously she had put a lot of effort in. There was a lot of interest for her as a teacher. And I really had nowhere else to go. And I figured, why not? I'll just do her class. So we went ahead and did this class on how to write Scifaiku. And at the end of the workshop, I wrote a poem, the very first poem I've written. In fact, I don't think I even had written any poetry for at least 20 years. I maybe had a few assignments in high school, and that was the last time I'd written a poem. But I wrote it. And at the end, she said, would you please stand up and read your poem to the class? And I look around and go, what class? I'm the only one here. But I did read my poem out loud, and I sat down, and she started to do a critique of the poem. Well, one of these editors happened to be sitting next to me. She suddenly leaned over and whispered in my ear, I loved your poem. I want to put it in my magazine. I'll pay you. And that, my friends, is the day I became a poet.
What a dream. What a dream experience to just kind of stumble into something and have all the connections right there. And you have that front and center experience with a teacher. That's so cool.
But anyway, I guess I'll wait for your questions, and you'll have to forgive me. I am a natural storyteller, so if I get a little long-winded, forgive me.
Okay, well, let's get you started with some icebreaker questions. Not that I think you need it, because you seem very comfortable, and you told me you're very experienced on panels, but I figured we'll get kind of started with some fun stuff and slowly segue into the topic. So my first question is, what is your favorite sci-fi movie or book right now?
That's a good question. And only science fiction movie, huh?
Mm-hmm.
I would say currently that would be Dune.
Okay.
The new one with Timothy Chalamet and Zendaya. And oh my God! I've read the original books. This is when I've even written book reviews on Dune. But I was blown away by this adaptation of the movie, of this book. And I'm very much looking forward to the sequel, which is Dune 2. And I understand Dune Messiah has just been greenlit. So there will be 3 of them altogether. So I'm very excited. I really love seeing this classic science fiction book portrayed true to the story, and just between the cinematography, the acting, I mean, everything. It's just this gestalt of just perfection. So I would say,
how does it compare to the one from what was it, the 80s, the 70s?
Yeah, that's the one with oh gosh, what was it? The guy from Sex and the City.
Mm-hmm.
I actually enjoyed it at the time, but only because I had read the book, and I understand that people that weren't familiar with the story of Dune had trouble following it. So, which I can understand. It's an incredibly complex story. I mean, that's why it's considered a classic today. It touches on themes of ecology, political power, of hero and anti-hero. I mean, it just is everything, and woven so expertly by Mr. So, yeah, I can see why people might have had trouble with that movie adaptation. And also, I don't mean to disparage David Lynch at all, but he missed a few things, and I think that was part of he was trying to put so much into one film that it just didn't quite work. Whereas the current adaptation was only half of book 1, and it allowed time to develop the characters and the world in a meaningful way. And so I think the current director, Denis Villeneuve, the name is, I think he took the right approach to this. But I anything this director has done, I love.
What is your favorite planet?
I would think, even though I live here on Earth, of course, I think my favorite planet must be Mars, although I think Venus comes in at a close second. Both planets have very interesting physical features, and they just fascinate me, considering they may have found life on Venus. There's something blue in the clouds that can't be explained except maybe because of light. And they're sending probes to investigate it, even as we speak. So I just find it all very fascinating. But Mars, of course, since it's the target of future immigration, and we've explored it so much, and we have so much information about it, I find it fascinating too. kind of reminds me a little of Dune with all the sand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love Mars too. I like looking up in the sky, although I think Venus is the brighter star. But Venus and Mars are very close to each other right now in the night sky, I've noticed for a while. Um, I think Venus is the Venus. Which one's Mars is smaller, right? But Venus is the one that's closer to Earth size.
Is smaller. It's bigger than the moon, but much smaller than Earth. Excuse
Okay.
me. And it's also further away from us.
Mm-hmm.
Venus is closer to us. It's about the same size as the Earth. And I think because of the cloud cover, it's kind of uniform and look, it's very bright in the sky. I think because the sun is shining on it, because it's so much closer to the sun. So
Yeah.
that's kind of, I believe we call it the morning star.
Oh, okay. Well, that's awesome. All right. And then my third icebreaker question is, given all the news headlines and FBI reports, and apparently, do you think aliens are visiting us right now?
I think Carl Sagan said that best. He says, with the vast size of the entire universe, if there isn't life other than us, that's a hell of a waste of space.
Agreed. Okay, so let's get going into this poetry, Scifaiku, Astropoetry reading today. So I thought it'd be fun to have you read some poems and then we discuss each one as we go. So is there one that you want to start with?
I am going to start with Close Approach.
Close Approach, a Scifaiku series by Wendy Van Camp. This poem series was nominated for the Pushcart Prize in 2022, and one of the segments of it was nominated for a Dwarf Star Award also in 2022. It was originally published in the Starlight Scifaiku Review in spring of 2021. The poem was inspired by a photo sent to Earth by the Curiosity rover on Mars and my research into Elon Musk's plan to colonize the planet. Close approach, the term, is the moment when Earth and Mars are at their nearest point and thus the shortest time for a spaceship to travel between planets. So here we go. Close approach. Journey through darkness. We are joined with industry. Legacy is saved. Dodge radiation. Humans reach for God of War. Take the close approach. Falling in thin air. Breathless anticipation. Regolith awaits. Rainbow galaxies compete with the stars above me. Mars is now my home.
Thank you for reading that, Wendy. I really enjoyed that. So I'm guessing based off of the way you wrote this, you have a very optimistic view on our aspirations to eventually colonize Mars. What are your thoughts on that?
If they need a poet laureate from Mars, I'm available. But unfortunately, I think I'm maybe a little bit too long in tooth to go. Unfortunately, I don't think the medical facilities are for women of my age. But you know what? It would be a grand adventure to go, and like any movement of the human race, we've slowly colonized this entire planet, and travel to other continents was not exactly easy for our ancestors, even 200 or 300 years ago. I mean, think of the tall ships and all that, and how long it took to go from Europe to the New World, or from Polynesia, from those explorers who went to South America and to Hawaii and all that. It was an incredible journey from any culture. Well, we're kind of at that precipice right now. Going to Mars is a long journey of 9 months. There's the danger of radiation exposure on the way. And when we reach the planet, there's really not a lot of atmosphere to protect us. The first colonists will probably have to live underground just for the protection of the radiation. But there is technology that could create an artificial magnetosphere. and there are other things that we could do to revitalize the planet. I've seen plans to terraform Mars to be almost Earth-like that would take maybe 100 years. So I don't know how valid these are. These are just theories, but I find them all to be very promising and very interesting. But I think the first step is for us to get there and to not dally.
How do you take so many ideas, so many thoughts and emotions, and put it into a short format like this? What do you focus on?
I've always I think I've always had a knack for writing small. I used to do game design in Mush environments, which is text-based role-playing games, which I don't know if they exist anymore, but back in the day they were quite popular. And I was what was known as a goddess slash wizard, and I would code entire worlds for people to play in. And I found when I did that, I enjoyed creating small spaces the best. I'd create little tucked away secret rooms and little trails that people have to stumble upon that they just didn't, I didn't put a sign up, here it is. They had to find it. And I really enjoyed doing these really tiny kind of things. And so when I started writing poetry, I think the smallness of Scifaiku and the use of the perfect word to bring the idea across really appealed to me. And it seems to be my wheelhouse as a poet. I actually have trouble writing long form poetry. I keep practicing and doing it, and I've been publishing a few longer pieces. But deep down, the short micro poetry form is my strength and what I enjoy doing the most.
What do you think makes, well, let's see if I can figure out how to ask this question. Basically, I want to say, like, what is best served to have short form for sci-fi? Does that make sense? Like, I guess, like, what is the biggest strength when you're applying sci-fi to that form?
That's a good question. I think for me, it's learning to carry ideas not only just with the word, but the emotion and the visual quality of how your words are arranged. When I write poetry, I sometimes draw on colloquialisms or different meanings of words in a different way. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but there's a lot more to it than just picking the right word. It's also carrying the emotion and carrying the trope and the idea through it. Short poetry is probably more difficult to write than long form, because in a long form you have more space to write in the words, and as a short story writer or a novelist you have even more space. But the Scifaiku, it has to be to the point, and it has to do a lot with less. And for me, that's just appealing. I don't, like I said, I don't know why. Not everybody can write Scifaiku, but I just happen to be one of those few that do.
All right, so let's move on to your next poem. Are we going in order of what you sent? So The Last Journey, is that the next one?
I believe it is. Let me move my little screen down here. Yes, The Last Journey.
Okay, go ahead whenever you're ready.
Anyway, The Last Journey is another Scifaiku series by Wendy Van Camp. It was published in Eccentric Orbits 2 in April of 2021, and I happen to be the editor of that anthology. The Scifaiku segment that was nominated for the Dwarf Star Award is As Galaxies Form, which is one of the segments. And let's see. And this is how I usually describe the poem before I read it at open mics. After 7 years of service, the supercomputer Mira performed one last simulation of our universe. The Scifaiku series commemorates her last journey before retirement and replacement by the AI Aurora. Basically, I was reading about a supercomputer that scientists were using to simulate the entire universe with certain properties earmarked. And these simulations that the AI created for them would take months or even a year at a time to do. And since this was her 7th journey, that's a considerable amount of time. And the scientists, when they spoke about the computer, spoke of her as if she were a person. And I thought, maybe she was, for all we know, considering all the news we have about sentient AI and supercomputers. I thought maybe she deserved an ode of sorts. So here we go. The Last Journey. AI, please show me. Bright stars engulfed within, dark matter halos. Gaze back and forward. Mirror, mirror on the wall. Universal history. Science watches God. A simulation of time. Gravity only. As galaxies form within halos of dark matter, the last journey ends. Mira shuts her eyes. Gravity journey over. Aurora arrives.
That's beautiful. I love the idea of personifying Mira and being able to kind of honor that impact that she had. What's really interesting to me about short form like this is that it's engravable, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So when it could be placed on plaques, it could be accompanying displays, it could go into time capsules, it can go with things on journeys. So, and I kind of love that this was a moment to say goodbye to one thing to welcome another. So how did you feel writing this? Like, were you leaning more into like the feeling of grief? Is it also some hope? What were your thoughts?
I really was interested by the personhood of this AI. And this was written several years ago before AI was really in the mainstream conversation. It was still considered something part of the scientific community. And I was really amazed at how these scientists would speak of this AI as a real person and that they respected her and the sense of honoring her as she basically was shut down and killed, if we want to be blunt.
Oh,
Well, think
sad.
but they honored her and they honored the information that she gave to them. And I just thought that, how we honor life after the people we know die, we like to remind ourselves of them. And so I kind of was thinking along those lines when I wrote this series of Scifaiku poems.
In addition to, so you talked about this one being nominated and being published. Are there any opportunities to work with NASA or have NASA see these things?
Well, I don't know. I have not personally worked with NASA, but the U.S. Poet Laureate just wrote a poem about Europa to be included with the Europa Clipper that's going to be blasting off from Earth sometime next year. If you go to NASA and look for a message in a bottle, you can sign up and have your name added to the inscriptions with her poem onto the spacecraft. And it's all free. So I kind of did that myself, and I've been urging a lot of the people in my city that come to my open mics to do so as well. I just think it's a cool idea. And Ada Limon's poem is beautiful, and she has recorded it both in English and in Spanish. And of course, you can read it just via text. So I highly recommend it.
What a beautiful thing that humans create art and want to share art. Just put it out there in the far reaches that we can possibly get. And maybe even like hope that if we do come across alien life forms that it could be intercepted and seen.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Okay, so cats are not allowed in paradise. I thought this was a kind of a charming change. As I was reading this, and this is inspired by your cat. So let's talk about cats are not allowed in paradise.
Yes, this poem is inspired by my little kitty, Biscuit. Whenever I go into the backyard to have a cup of coffee in the morning, and I have like a little garden setting back there. She likes to sit in the kitchen, looking out through the window, very mournful because she can't come out with me. but as the poem states, it's not always safe for her. The title, Cats Are Not Allowed in Paradise, just sort of came to me intuitively. I just sort of burst into my mind. I tend to be an intuitive writer. I have a highly trained muse, and it does double time for me sometimes. um, but yeah, when I usually announce the title, I actually get people go, "What? What do you mean cats are not allowed in paradise?" But when they hear the poem, they understand. But anyway, this poem was published in The Junction, which is an online magazine on Medium, in March of 2022, so it's fairly recent. And I'll go ahead and read it to you. Cats are not allowed in paradise. Entering the garden, coffee cup mist waves as daybreak warms my face. The cast iron chair is cold and sturdy. The grit of dust polishes my legs. In pools of light, splashes of color engulf me. Hot cocoa hues blend in rusty roses, while pink-yellow climbers reach for the sun. Lemon oil scents my fingers from fresh-picked citrus on the table in my personal Elysian field. Soft meows at the kitchen door reveal a tiny mournful face imprisoned in the shadows. My heart softens to her plight, but my ankles must remain free of the soft brush of feline fur. For cats are not allowed in paradise. Vertical explorations into tall trees will lead us to misadventures, and wild coyotes prowl outside these solid stone walls. I cannot open the door.
I like how we've kind of taken our sights off of the sky for a minute and kind of focused here on the ground with our personal relationships and intimate, family members, and our pets. And I relate to this because I live in Arizona and I never see stray cats because they get eaten by the coyotes and the bobcats and the owls and everything that we have here. So, clearly this is a personal poem because it's your cat, but in the greater context of our conversation today and our conversation about earth and sky and all planets, what makes this a poem that you wanted to include today?
Well, I usually do write speculative poetry, but since I've become a poet laureate, I have been trying to branch out into more literary work. This was just a poem I was doing at a workshop just for practice, and I thought it turned out rather well. And as I've taken it to various open mics in my city and beyond, I find that it's become quite popular. And I thought it was a nice counterpoint to all my speculative poetry, just to let your listeners know that, I'm not a one-trick pony.
You've got many talents. Well, I just love the focus on details that you do appreciate when you're in that moment, like the coffee cup and how it's misting, and then you have the sensation of an iron chair. You got dust, you got light, you got colors surrounding you, scents of fruit, and then that combined with the fur of your cat. I just think it really does a great job of putting you in the moment. And I love that about literature and poetry in general, and how it can put a reader right there with you.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
And then we have your fourth poem, Cassandra. Tell me about Cassandra.
Cassandra is an older poem. It published back in July of 2018. It was one of my first efforts, even one of the first of my poems that started publishing in a regular magazine. This one was in one called Lit Up, which is also on Medium, but it was a very popular magazine, and it was not an easy one to get into. So I was very honored when they selected my poem. This poem was inspired, of course, by the myth of Cassandra, but I decided to do it in more of a science fiction form. So here we go. Cassandra. In the morning, your ship will be sailing, prepared by your father to whisk you safe. Watch the Silicon City understanding as the people flee the enemy in haste. Now that the last bloody day is dawning, you suffer your secrets within your heart, for none would listen to words of warning. O Cassandra, it is time to depart. Into the fair skies you rocket up, away from the death you have foreseen. In orbit, solar sails prepare to cup waves of photon energy by machine. Sorry, Cassandra, we did not believe. We only saw it as dreams you would weave.
That one definitely has a sadder tone than the ones that we've read before. Can you walk me through the Cassandra mythology?
Well, Cassandra was a prophetess who lived in the city of Troy, and she foresaw the fall of Troy. You might remember the Trojan horse story and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And she was chastised by everyone. Nobody believed her. And in the end, of course, her city fell to the enemy. So that's why this one's so sad. I'm trying to capture the original sadness and despair from the original legend. But I decided to switch it up and make it more of a futuristic sci-fi kind of feel too. So, like I said, it's one of my earlier efforts, but I still like it, and I tend to save it to be the last poem I read when I'm doing a longer reading.
I love it. That makes me think of, I mean, if relating it to current events, I guess, well, maybe not even current events, but the idea that people are worried about a home and warning and warning and warning, and then no one heeds your warning, and
Mhm.
you watch something kind of crumble.
I wrote this a long time ago, but it seems to be becoming more and more real as time goes on, doesn't it? Oh my.
Okay. So I figure we do this kind of fun thing before we move on to the rest of the questions where we work with our listeners to create an original poem. So this will be kind of interesting. I don't know if have you ever done this before in this context?
Well, I do teach Scifaiku poetry workshops, so I figure we'll kind of do something along those lines. I actually composed my work in a special notebook and with a fountain pen, and I'm going to pull that out right now while we
Okay.
work on this. So let me get a page, move my keyboard over with hopefully not tipping it off the shelf. There we go.
Okay. And then I'm going to place in the chat the prompts that I received.
Okay.
So what I did was I posted on our Instagram stories and said, participate in this Scifaiku exercise, fill out these prompts. And so we asked people to give us a sci-fi trope, an emotional word, and a season or time, one word, season or time. So we got that. Did you want to, are we all of them, or are we picking from the list?
Let me explain what we're going to do, because these are all parts that you probably need to include in a sci-fi coup poem, and that's what we're going to write. Just to let you know, Vicky, a sci-fi coup poem is very similar to haiku. You have 5-syllable line on the first line, 7-syllable line on the middle line, and again a 5-syllable line for the third line. Now, when we write Scifaiku, at the basis of the poem needs to be a science fiction trope. And so that is what the first column is. And let me read this out for your listeners to hear. Sci-fi trope, cybernetic implants, aliens are humans, time travel, AI goes rogue, fish out of water, robots, evil aliens, the ghost in the machine. So this is going to be the basic trope that we work with. We're not going to use all of them. You will pick the one that appeals to you the most, one that resonates with you as a poet. Now, the emotional words that were given are tearful, distraught, horny, anxious, and or anxiety, somber, and exhausted. And what we want to do is make sure we incorporate a single emotion in the poem we write. So we're going to combine one trope from the list with one emotional word. Now, the final section are season and time. This is also known as a kigo in Japanese haiku. And just to let your listeners know, Scifaiku is kind of a specialized form of haiku, but we are not required to have a kigo or seasonal word in the poem. However, if you can put one in, it makes the poem stronger, and I think it improves it, but it is not required. And a lot of people don't realize that. So if you're out there listening, it is not required. Okay.
Okay, so to do all this in 3 lines, is that the goal?
That's it. Oh, and let me read the words that were listed for your listeners. It's serendipity, birth, spring, winter, autumn, dusk, epidemic. Now, I have to say,
Not one word.
is not, well, no, it's also not a moment in time. The kigo needs to be a moment in time. So serendipity would not work either. I think the ones from here that would is birth is actually a good one. Spring, winter, autumn, and dusk are the ones I think, if you choose to. Again, they're more optional. So what we need to do is pick a trope that appeals to us. So maybe time travel or robots or, whatever.
Okay.
And then what I usually tell my students to do is to just let your mind kind of go and start writing down phrases that might fit with the trope. And what I try to do is try to get them in either 5-syllable length or 7-syllable length. Now, for me, it'll be easy because, I'm experienced. It might be a little more difficult for you.
I'm going to do so bad, but you're my teacher.
But I want to say, don't worry about it, because honestly, even if it isn't perfect, that's okay. If you have to do like 8 lines or whatever, I mean, technically in Scifaiku, you can be even shorter. It could be like 1 word at the very end that just kind of is a punctuation. It's still valid. Even though we try to strive for the 5-7-5 syllable format, it doesn't have to be that way. And I've seen professional haiku poets that they pull out all stops and do all kinds of things. So don't worry about it. Just be creative, and let's try to at least talk about what we're doing, just so your listeners kind of have something to listen to, because otherwise it's just a scribbling.
Okay. I kind of have an idea that I'm playing with. So I like to just reach out. First of all, what I find interesting is that all the emotional words, with the exception of horny, are like sad, right? They're tearful, distraught, anxious, somber, exhausted. No one submitted jolly or eager, stuff like that. So already I'm feeling like this poem's gonna be a little dark. But I want to go into, can it be humorous? That's kind of
Absolutely.
my thing.
If it's your poem, it can be anything you want. And by the way, when I do teach my Scifaiku class, I always stress that you can have cheerful emotional words. I try to inject some optimism into it, but even so, it usually comes out pretty. People seem to associate poetry with dire emotions, I guess, but it doesn't have to be that way.
Okay, well, I have a thought. I wanted to do cybernetic implants, and I wanted I need a 1 word to replace nefarious. I need a word to replace that.
Nefarious, 4 syllables.
Right. So what's a 1 syllable I can replace? Because I put down, damn this nefarious ear hole, because I'm going to do cybernetic implants.
You're actually at 8 syllables. That could be your middle line. And if you take out damn, you would be at 7.
I would be at 7.
Okay. And it's usable for you. You should at least write it down so that you know that it's there, and you may not use it. I always recommend you generate at least 10 5-syllable lines and at least 3 to 4 of the 7. So that's one of your 7 right there.
Okay. So my thought process was, I want to improve the way that I hear things. So I'm going to use a cybernetic implant in my head, but it has disastrous results.
Okay.
I end up hearing things, but I hear things I don't want to hear. Like, it's too much. So
In Scifaiku, you want to shorten each idea. You have about 3 or 4 different ideas in just that line alone.
okay.
Look at the sentence and look at each part individually, excuse me, and decide which part is the strongest.
Okay. So here's, I'll just read what I've got so far. However, okay, is the final poem just 3 lines, or can we make multiple groupings of those?
Well, you can do multiple groupings on a theme, but I would focus on just trying to get one poem done. So
Okay.
3 lines only. And if you have extra lines, you can use them later. Don't worry, that nothing gets thrown away. That's why I always compose my poetry in a single notebook where I scribble and cross out things and whatever, but it's there and it goes back like almost 10 years now in the same book. God forbid if I ever lost it, right?
Mhm.
But I like that because then I can go back and look at what I wrote in the past, and sometimes that inspires new work too. And sometimes, on rare occasions, I find poems I'd forgotten I've written, and whoop, that's great because then they can go into my submission file.
Okay.
If you feel your language is simple, don't worry about that. Sometimes people think of poetry as these real long words and it's, for college professors. I don't believe that as a poet. I think poetry should be accessible from the ground up, and simple language that gets to the point is more than acceptable. And in fact, in some cases, preferable. So that's my opinion. I'm sticking to it.
Okay, so then cybernetic sounds, this nefarious ear hole, somber are your words.
I like that. That's good. I'd say that's a poem.
Should we
And
try to
let
put
me analyze it real quick. That's not too bad. I mean, yeah, it would be considered now just to go over the different parts. Cybernetic sounds is your science fiction trope, so that's what makes it Scifaiku. Nefarious earhole. Nefarious is an emotional term. It, means something kind of mysterious or whatever. Somber are your words. That's again a strong emotion. Now, this particular one does not have a kigo, but again, in Scifaiku, it's not a requirement. So you're fine. Now, there are such things as cutting words as well. I think your nefarious earhole might technically qualify for that, but I would still play with it before I would call it a cutting word. And I'm not going to go into that. This is a more advanced haiku. When I visit haiku societies, you would be amazed at some of the conversations that go on among the master poets and about the ma of haiku, and it's just incredible. I sometimes just sit back and go, huh. I just like to write. That's what I do.
Well, thank you for teaching me how to do a Scifaiku. I can't promise that I'm the best student. I did my best. I had fun with the words that were submitted. And I will put these on social media as well for anyone else that wants to play with these words and maybe submit their own Scifaiku. Would you be willing to give your critiques on those? Should that happen?
I certainly would.
Okay, perfect. So my next question is, we have some speculative fiction lovers and writers listening to this podcast. What advice do you have for those who are like, wow, this is really cool. I want to try doing this.
Well, I would first suggest getting a book on the subject or taking a class. I do teach at many of the top name science fiction conventions like WorldCon and Balticon and other locations, but there are other teachers as well. There are also just books. I don't know if there's necessarily books on sci-fi-ku, but there are books on haiku. And if you learn the words of haiku and you follow the words from the Sci-Fi-ku manifesto, which is online, I think you can become a credible sci-fi-ku poet. I would also read sci-fi-ku so that you get an idea of how it is. And there are many magazines that specialize in sci-fi-ku poetry. Sci-fi-kuus is one. The Starlight Sci-fi-ku Review is another. Starline is a good one to find sci-fi-ku poems. And there are a couple more. You would just have to find magazines that specialize in speculative poetry. You usually see Scifaiku there.
Are you available to teach anybody that's listening right now?
I do teach classes. I'm actually thinking of setting up some classes on my Substack, but I'm still kind of in the process of getting it going. I do mentor as well. I basically mentor people on the convention circuit and how to get started as a speaker and things of that. I only do it for a limited number. I actually have a mentee right now, but I will be open to taking more probably toward the end of the year. So if they're interested, they should look to my website, wendyvancamp.com, or on my Substack, which is nowastedink.substack.com. I have a free newsletter that you're welcome to subscribe to, but I'm going to be adding subscription content there as well as time goes on. So I think classes will definitely be a part of that. I do teach for free, but I only do that in my city where I'm the poet laureate as a service to the city. But for other places, you usually have to pay to see me, I'm afraid. Either you pay the convention or, it's to me directly as an instructor. So
How does someone become a city laureate? And is that only available in like major cities, or can we start one in any like smaller town?
well, a poet laureate, it depends on your city if they decide to have a program. Not all cities do. And poet laureates can be of many levels. There are city poet laureates, which is what I am. There are county level poet laureates, and there are statewide poet laureates. And then, of course, the U.S. government has a poet laureate. I believe I mentioned the current U.S. poet laureate, who Ada Limon earlier. But yeah, it has to be something set up by the city. It's not always a paid position. In fact, usually it's unpaid. I'm lucky because I had a limited budget, so it allowed me to produce a anthology for the local poets in our area, and they were all thrilled to be published. Many of them, this was the first time that their words had seen print, but I had a lot of experienced poets come on board too, because I guess they realized that, yes, I do nominated for Best of the West, or I'm sorry, Best of the Net, and for the Pushcart Prize. So a few of them will see that in their future from my anthology. But yeah, it's really hit or miss. If you're interested in being a poet laureate, make sure you have published at least one poetry collection, that you have to have experience in being a public speaker to be able to give readings. And I would recommend also community organizing experience. I basically am organizing a large scale library event for my city. I did it last year. I'm kind of on track to do it this year again. I also, I do a lot, and you really have to have a lot of multiple hats. I don't really think being a poet laureate is actually being a fantastic poet, although that certainly doesn't hurt. I think it's more being inspiring to others, teaching, and being a great organizer. So I think those are the most powerful skills that you should have as a poet laureate.
Well, Wendy, thank you so much for being on Speculative Sandbox. I learned something new today. I hope our listeners learned something new today. It was really, really great to do something different. And I was really happy to hear that they have poet laureates for speculative fiction, particularly, and that
Well,
cities supported that.
I better qualify that. I'm only one of four in the entire United States. We're
What?
very rare. Very rare.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is your next step? Are you going to go for the US level?
I don't know about that. Yeah, my city just happened to be very strong in STEAM or STEM education in the library system, which is bringing science to students. And so I thought my poetry might be a liability when I applied for the position, but it turned out to be an asset. So, but I'm really very much an exception. So, and every system is different. So I don't mean to say to put out the, well, anyway, you know what I mean.
Do you have any final remarks for our listeners?
Well, I just wanted to say it's been a pleasure to be here. And I certainly hope that you will keep up with me. My website, of course, is wendyvancamp.com. My free monthly newsletter is found at nowastedink.substack.com. And just look around at all the conventions that go on. Chances are you'll see me there as a panelist. And please come to my panels and say hello. And I guess that's it.
Speculative Sandbox is a volunteer-run podcast that relies on the collaboration of fellow creators like you. Join the conversation and participate in fun polls and questionnaires on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. Interested in being in a future episode? Our DMs are open, or you can email speculativesandbox@gmail.com.